Hello, welcome back to Paul's Stuff. This is my space on YouTube where I get to talk about all the things I love. Lots of Star Wars, lots of lightsabers. And today is about lightsabers. It's one of those technical videos where I try and help out with setting up your, in this case, Xeno3 pixel lightsaber. I think this relates to the Xeno3 baselit as well. And actually most of it relates back to the Xenopixel V2 as well. So one of the things I've been asked is about Pre-Ons in Xenopixel lightsabers. So what we understand as a Pre-On in the lightsaber world generally is comes from boards like Profi, where you can set a Pre-On, which is a sound file which will play before the ignition file of the saber. Then the ignition file will play, and then the hum sound will play. So very often they're quotes, so you'll get the character saying something, and then the ignition sound, and then you'll get the hum sound, and the saber will run from there. You also get what are known as post-offs, which are sounds that will play after the saber has extinguished itself. So you turn the blade off, you'll get the retraction sound, and then it will play any post-off sound. So this is what we understand by pre-on and post-off generally in the lightsaber world. However, those sort of pre-ons and post-offs are not possible currently on the Xeno3. There is no way to add those currently on the Xeno3. However, if we go onto the SD card of the Xeno3, this is what you will see. We have all these numbered files. These are the font folders. And then we have the setting folder, which we're going to go into. And then in the setting folder, we're going to look for the config file, which is down here. And we're going to go into that config file. Now, the reason I've brought this other config file up as well is because currently I'm finding if you update your config file via or you use the update feature for the config file on the Xeno configurator. So if we go into here, we can see update software. You need to click into the little global that will bring up any sabers that you've opened with it. You can change the names on them. So as you can see, all of my Xeno3 sabers are on here. If we go into one of those, you can update the software. That's updating the firmware for on the SD card, basically. Now, currently, if you do that via the app, your config file will end up looking like this. So in the config file, we have these lines that have hashes before them, and those are for information. Those are giving you information about what each of the lines is doing in the config file. But if you update your config file via the app, currently those will be changed to these non-English figures. So just bear that in mind. Hopefully you will have kept a copy of your original config file, your original SD card setup. So you should then have a copy with the English version of the information that you can go back to and refer to. But this is another reason why it's always important to make a copy of your config of your SD card before you start working on it. But currently, if you access the SD card after you've updated on the app, this is what your config file will look like, not this. So with that out of the way, what are we looking at on here? So I've already said that prions, in the sense that we generally understand them in the lightsaber world, don't exist on the Xeno3 currently. There is no way of having the Xeno3 play a sound file before the ignition file, sound file, or after the retraction sound file. Can't be done currently, as it can be on other sabers. But the config file is mentioning prions. It says here, prion blade mode times. So what is this referring to? What the config file for the Xeno3 is referring to when it says prions are actually the ignition styles. There are currently 7 of them, and if we have a look at this, we can see there are 7 lines here underneath this information line which is mentioning prions. So what the config file for the Xeno3 is referring to as prions are actually the ignition styles. And what these lines are doing is matching the time that the lighting effect for that ignition style will play with the time it takes to play the soundtrack for that ignition style. So if we were to play the broken ignition sound file, it would take 1400 milliseconds for that ignition style to play. That's 1.4 seconds, and this is setting the time for the lighting effect that happens at the same time as the sound effect, so that they match one another. So actually we don't need to touch any of these. These are set at the factory to match the ignition styles that are on the saber. Why it's here is because if you go in and customize any of these sound files, then you'll need to customize these times to match the new sound file. Fairly straightforward. But not strictly speaking a prion in the sense that it's generally understood in the lightsaber world. Is mentioned again down here. These lines here are numbered the same as the font folders, and these are the blade setups for each font. And if we have a look at all these figures that are in here, the last of the single figures, so in this case this last 0 here, is the blade style setting. And if we have a look at what it says, this is F under, if you look up here, there's an example with letters on, and then each of the letters are mentioned here. F is the default style for each font blade. So 0 is the standard blade, then we have velocity blade, torch blade, blaster blade, ghost blade, and then special prions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. And once again that is referring to these 7 ignition styles, not prions, ignition styles. So if we look at this first line, this is set to 0, so this is actually just a standard blade. Standard blade is 0. If we look at the next one, that's set to 10. So if we look at these, this is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a scavenger ignition setting on that one. Font 2 is a ray blade, so that's appropriate for that. And if we look at the next one, it's gone back to a standard blade again, and standard blade, etc. Most of them are going to be standard blade. velocity blade, torch blade, blaster mode and ghost mode are nice, but you don't tend to use them. You're mostly using standard blade and the Pre-Ons. You can turn off velocity, torch, blaster and ghost if you like. That's where you get that anomaly then, though, that the first 3 or 4 settings in the blade style will say broken ignition. It will say standard blade and then it will say broken ignition 5 times, and actually only the last one is broken ignition, because it's not selecting the 4 blade modes anymore. It's just going straight to broken ignition. So I leave them on because then they are there and it saves confusion in that menu. When you first get your saber, all of these will be turned off by default. So your saber won't have velocity mode, torch mode, blaster mode, ghost mode set on by default. You'll have to go into the config and turn those on. Likewise with multi-block, multi-lock and lightning block, for which I have a separate video. But let's come back to this again. So just to recap, what is generally accepted as being a Pre-On is a sound file that will play before the ignition sound file plays on the saber. The Xeno3 currently doesn't do that. What is being referred to in the Xeno3 config file as a Pre-On is actually the ignition styles. It's these fellas here. Now let's have a look at the future. So if we come back to our setting folder, we'll have a look at these sound files that say blade. Now there are 100 of them, but if you click into them, there are currently only
standard mode, velocity mode, torch mode.
There are currently only the file settings that we have, the blade styles that we currently have on the saber.
Blaster mode, ghost mode.
And when we get to number 6, we start onto those what in the config are called Pre-Ons, but are actually the ignition styles.
Broken ignition, photon ignition, stack ignition, warp ignition, phaser ignition, scavenger ignition, hunter ignition.
The hunter ignition is the last of them. If we go into blade 13, it will just say blade 13.
Blade 13.
And that's the same then for the rest of them, all the way up to blade 100. So clearly what is going on here is there is extra space for new blade styles and ignition styles to be added at a future date. Now, if we go back into the Xeno configurator again, if we go down to this little slider tab at the bottom, we have 3 customizing sections which are not currently available. They haven't been fully developed yet and are not on the app yet. But we can see here we're going to get custom functions. It may be possible within that to add Pre-Ons at some point. I don't know. I'm not privy to how this is being developed. We also have custom light effects. So again, that may enable at some point, these may enable Pre-Ons to be added in the strictest sense of the word. We also have custom fonts, and again that could conceivably have at some point the possibility for Pre-Ons to be added. But almost certainly we're going to be able to add new ignition styles and blade styles via the custom function and the custom light function. We'll have to wait and see how these all work in the future. They're currently under development. If you click on one of them, it says feature coming soon. So that is the current state of Pre-Ons, or not Pre-Ons, on the Xeno3. I do apologise, I should have put on Do Not Disturb. I'm getting emails and all sorts coming through. So yeah, that's the current state of what are described in the config file as Pre-Ons. So on the Xeno3 currently, there are no Pre-Ons. What are being described as Pre-Ons are actually the ignition styles. So I hope this has been helpful. This is a video that's been asked for now a couple of times. A couple of people have said to me, what about Pre-Ons? What do we do with Pre-Ons on the Xeno3? So sadly, guys, the answer is there are no Pre-Ons at the moment. What are being referred to as Pre-Ons are ignition styles. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please do consider giving it a like. That tells YouTube and consequently everybody else that people are enjoying this sort of content. If you have found this helpful and you want more information on the Xeno3 and how it operates and the technical side of it, please do have a look at the channel. There's more videos like this on the Xeno3 and on the Xeno V2 as well, the Xenopixel V2, the predecessor to the Xeno3. So please do have a look at the channel. If you haven't already, then consider subscribing. If you hit the notification bell, it will tell you when I'm doing more videos like this and other stuff as well. Lots of lightsaber stuff on the channel. So if you're into this, you may well find the channel is interesting to you. So I think that's everything for today. If you have things like this that you'd like to know more about and you can't find a video on, please do leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll certainly consider what I can do about that and see if I can make a video to help answer your questions. That's where this video has come from, really. This is a response to people asking about Pre-Ons. So that's all I've got for today. Once again, thank you for watching through this far. If you've gotten to the end of this video, well done. Good job. I know my videos aren't always that engaging. They are a little bit technical sometimes and they can be a bit dry and boring. But thank you for watching through if you have. And all that leaves me to do now is to say cheerio.